I'm Tom Hogan. I'm the coordinator of the Milwaukie Poetry Series, and we are delighted, I'll say it again, we are delighted to have you all here. I think as we're all adjusting to standard time. So, yeah, we come and it's dark, but we're adjusting to that. So welcome to our reading tonight. We have a terrific poet. I want to make a few thanks before I introduce Don, and it's thanks, of course, to the city of Milwaukie. We are the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee, and we're in our 13th season, so we're very excited about that. This is the third reading of our 13th season, and the city has been supportive right from the beginning. And secondly, thanks to the Letting Library. So most of you probably know we're getting a new library, and that's why we're here. So we have the first 5 readings here at St. John the Evangelist, and we're very grateful to St. John's for partnering with us and hosting us here while we wait for the library to be finished. Just this week, I got an opening date. It is going to be in early January, and that's going to be announced fairly soon. Our first reading, our January reading, who is Clem Stark, is going to be here. And Greg Simon, who is our February reader, and I want to welcome his wife and daughter, who are sitting here in front. So thank you for being here. And he's going to be our February reader, and that reading is going to be in the library. So we're pretty excited about the library. So thanks to the Letting Library. And finally, thanks to the Milwaukie Poetry Committee. So as you know, you don't have something happen unless you have people working on it. And we have a very active poetry committee meeting. You've already met one of them who is helping get the chairs set up. So Emmett Wheatfall is right here. Dan Hobbs is right over here. I'm also standing. Can we give them a hand? Because, as I say, you have to have a group of people who are committed to it and are working on it to have something happen. We do a broadside of one of Don's poems, and I think everybody's got a copy, but if you don't, either Emmett or my lovely wife Jane will get you one. I see a lot of new faces here. How many people are here for your first time? Anybody? Okay, let's give them a hand. Thank you very much for being here. So we do have a sign-up sheet. If you'd like to receive emails about our events, because we have readings, and in addition to the readings, we have other things that we sponsor, including poetry workshops, open mics, talks, and we're going to have our schedule for the rest of the season come out fairly soon, which is something about all of those other events. Our next, I call it, other event is going to be a Friends of William Stafford birthday celebration on the 11th of January, and because the library's not officially open, that's going to be here. So that's going to be in the afternoon. There'll be an invitation for that. So if you sign up on our list, you would receive those invitations. If you would, silence your smartphones, beepers, pagers, telephonic devices. That would be great. Don has brought books available, and so they're going to be over here. And I've been looking forward to this reading quite a bit. This is Don's second time here with us. He came to Poetry late, which many of you may know, in the midst of a long career as a journalist. He worked as a reporter for the Washington Post and the Oregonian, and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in feature reading. Since 2006, he has published 5 poetry collections, including 4 chapbooks. All 5 either won or placed in national manuscript contests. His newest volume, Mortality with Pronoun Shifts, won this year's Kathy Smith Bowers Chapbook Prize. He says he doesn't think it's as morbid as it sounds. Would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Don Colburn?
Thank you, Tom. This Milwaukie poetry series, in my humble and totally disinterested, unbiased opinion, is one of the best. So my job tonight is to keep it that way. I'll start with a little poem. It's a November poem, not this year, but I think it could have been. In memory of William Trevor, the great Irish storyteller, story writer. It's called Ginkgo on 19th. End of November, end of what Auden Shirley would call a low, dishonest year. My legs and meds are working well enough to walk the neighborhood while a cold rain holds off. Most of the leaves down, stuck to the sidewalk with old rain. The piles, they'll never dry out, never skitter. The piles in the street are soggy bran. But right there on the other side of 19th, a little ginkgo stands out, brilliant yellow. Its leaves holding on, or is it the tree holding on? Another imponderable that won't change the subject in this ordinary afternoon, this dark time. I think of the ordinary stories you told, how lovely and sad they became without need of symbols, how you believed in not quite knowing, and how there is always, always, as you said in a made-up true story, a little more to it than that. Why I read obituaries. I listen for a distant bell, even when the name is one I couldn't have come up with. Today it was Bruce Langhorne, 78. His right hand missing 2 fingers and much of a thumb, blown off by homemade fireworks when he was 12, which didn't keep him from taking up guitar and learning to play so well. He played with Dylan and Baez, Lightfoot and Rush. From the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he performed with Odetta before 250,000 the day Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream." There were folk rock gigs in Hollywood and a mid-career swerve to Hawaii, where he grew macadamia nuts. Diabetes inspired him to cook up organic low-sodium salsa he sold as Brother Brew Brew's hot sauce. Death is the one news hook later soon we all achieve. But an obit needs a better reason to tell its story. Mr. Langhorne's goes back to 64, when he walked into the recording studio carrying an enormous Turkish drum with bells. And Dylan, in that jingle jangle morning, he came following to sing a song for us. This is the first poem in this new book that Tom mentioned. It's called Bristlecone Pines, and it has an epigraph, a line at the top, a quote from a sign that we saw in Great Basin National Park in Nevada, which said, "A great reluctance to die is common among bristlecone pines." Isn't it enough that this one, say, has been around longer than Jesus or Buddha? And that one's older than Pliny the Elder or Roquefort cheese, and most, if not all, dirt. Can I look at survival in a weather-beaten tree and call its twisted beauty beautiful? The mortal sign maker insists on more, insists the ones that faced the worst adversity, the most relentless wind and drought, wound up living longest, outlasting death even, like bones. That makes a good story, maybe a fable. And it's true their bony branches bristle and snag the dying light this afternoon. But I've watched for a while now, and the great reluctance isn't theirs. Thank you all for coming out. Wow. I'm not sitting down yet. I'm going to read 12 or 13, so that's, now it's only like 10, if you're counting. Agenda for Getting Away at 69. After Hayden Carruth, Without Apology. Hayden Carruth wrote a wonderful poem, I think, called Agenda at 74. I recommend it no matter what your age is. And so I borrowed some of the form of that poem, and this poem also shares with Hayden Carruth's poem at least one word, one big word. And I won't tell you what it is, so you'll just have to guess and keep paying attention. It comes toward the end. Agenda for Getting Away at 69. Pack, backpack, then jam it in back of fan next to cooler. Check Weather Channel again. Ignore red and magenta fire alerts. Tap barometer. Look out window. Shrug. Drive the Gorge Highway east, then north toward Yakima, past giant windmill blades not moving. Go through Apple Maggot Quarantine Zone and godforsaken military area. Pull into tumbleweedy rest stop to stretch, etc. Ignore litter. Ignore warning about rattlesnakes. Scan sky for haze, smoke, thunderheads. Wet right index finger with spit and hold it up for wind gauge. Shrug. Continue overpass to dead logging town, born again as faux Bavarian tourist trap. Stop at ranger station. Ask how it is up in the enchantments, making sure not to call them, as my neighbor did, the attachments. Listen to useless, out-of-date, third-hand boilerplate about wind, smoke, fire, and mountain goats eager to lick your pee off rocks. Escape into town, windows rolled up against oompa music on Village Green. Stop for gelato and Wi-Fi, check baseball scores, turn onto Icicle Road in 97-degree heat. Note irony and uselessness of noting irony. Blow right by trailhead sign, back up, squeeze into semi-legal space, unload pack, wrestle it on, tighten belt, wince, tap altimeter, ditto fucking out of service phone, look up, sniff for smoke, start walking anyway. By coincidence, I read here, not here, in the Milwaukie series, there, is it there? 10 years ago and 2 days ago. 10 years and 2 days ago. And it was Veterans Day. So here's one I read that night. And I suspect it's a place that many of you will recognize or have been to as well. Veterans Day night at the War Memorial. All along the glassy black wide angle, they look away and back. Some carry candles or white carnations. A woman reaches to grave rub a block from 67 onto a page of her brochure. It prints like a darkroom photograph. Odd how we abstract a thing, a war, to make it real, a wall of losses. Down the slow line, I find myself staring at a man ambushed by a name. He's in old boots and fatigues, cap in his hands, balding, paunchy, grizzle-cheeked, about my age. He can't stop looking down at his boots, the litter of medals. Can't stop sobbing in bursts, his face clenching and unclenching like a fist or a heart. I might have been that man, or either of us become a chiseled stone. Years ago, I came to this mall to march with thousands. Easy as it was to leave the war to strangers such as these, the one here now, and one he sees and doesn't see. Here's the title poem for that new book, Mortality with Pronoun Shifts. And I'd like to dedicate the reading of this poem to my friend, our friend to many of you, Joe Soldati. Joe is, as many of you know, a poet, a teacher, a character, and Joe is not well. He's at home in his apartment in downtown Portland. I visited him yesterday afternoon, and he was Joe. He's lying in a hospital bed in his living room, but Paul Ann's had the same experience. He's Joe. There's nobody like him, as I told him. And we had some laughs and some tears, and he said, "You know, Don, if I knew dying was so much hard work, I would have gotten somebody else to do it." And that's Joe. That's Joe. Mortality with pronoun shifts. Closer than you think this very minute, if you're lucky to have something else in mind. Closer even, you know now, than the sizzle of a thunderbolt out on the glacier, not a tree for miles. The ice axe, a lightning rod in your right hand. Your whole body a lightning rod. Or that time on I-89, ski season, when with you riding shotgun, no seatbelt, Chaz steered his father's laundry truck into the passing lane and the left front wheel caught the edge of a drift and we spun into the foot-deep center strip and fishtailed, missing the abutment. Closer now, on this I am bedrock sure, than when I woke up this morning, still lucky. Does everybody know what a chapbook is? Should not, okay. It's a little book. I mean, to me, it's a little book. Usually with the number of pages as a multiple of 4, because in the old days, you would take a page and fold it and then fold it again so they get 4 pages out of 1 to save money or something. But when you look up chapbook, it's like a lot of other things on Wikipedia. It gets pretty scary. So let me just read 2 things that I found this afternoon when I foolishly did that. Because they're beautiful chapbooks, I think. And they're often letterpress and hand printed, but there's a history starting either in, I learned, the 18th century or the 19th century, no one knows. And here are 2 paragraphs I read from Histories of Chapbooks, the history of chapbooks. These flimsy booklets were often sold in less than reputable establishments and contained a variety of less than quality poetry, stories, ballads, and political dissent, often filled with spelling mistakes, factual blunders, and little in the way of quality assurance. These chapbooks often connected with the uncultured alone. The alone is particularly bothersome. And then farther down, chapmen had a reputation for being rogues, and like the above-mentioned Autolycus, sometimes doubled as pickpockets in their journeys to and from towns and rural villages. Such journeys found chapmen frequently bedding in barns, fleeing from dogs, and fending off thefts from other road scoundrels. Let's hear it for chapbooks. A lot of times I think a poem turns on a single word, or maybe starts by holding one word up to the light or to greater attention. So here's one that may do that. And it has an epigraph from a writer named Florence King, who was a prolific, conservative, curmudgeonly columnist and writer. And here's the quote: "Very is the most useless word in the English language and can always come out. This very morning." After I shouted him out for his new book, Philip emailed right back, saying, "Nice to hear good news this morning," as he was headed out to say a final goodbye to an old friend. He had to get to the ICU and be done before 10 a.m. when the other thing was set to happen. Philip, who lives in a flood zone near a landfall for hurricanes and has written books about 100-year storms, race riots, and several wars, said it somehow seems wrong they can schedule things like that, meaning the very end of a life. It's almost 10 their time now, or his. In his email, Philip said he liked knowing that another old friend, me, had time for a good thought this morning. But what good is that good thought as he leans over a bed in a curtained-off bay, trying to say goodbye to someone with a tube down his throat who probably can't even hear the whoosh and wheeze of his temporary breath? "I bet this happens more often than you think," is a thought I won't share when I write Philip back this very morning, not knowing what else to say, especially at the very end. Pocket Guide to Tenses. The past, because we know how it turned out. Imperfect, because we actually don't. The present happening while it happens. Pluperfect, whatever the heck that is. Subjunctive, trying hard to say, what if? Future, for what has time to prove us wrong. A friend of mine, a writer, once asked me this question. One word or less, why do you write? It didn't go well. There are several scary things about that. I mean, first, why do you write? And if that's not scary, and it may not be to some of you, but the one word is pretty scary. The or less is even worse. So I thought about this later quite a bit and wrestled with it, and then wrestled the wrestling maybe into a poem. This is a little different and weird, so bear with me. And I've never dared read this one to anyone, not even my friend. One word or less, why do you write? Good question. Error, answer exceeds allowable word count. Jeez, thought you were kidding about the one word. Give me a minute to think out loud. Don't start counting yet. How about memory? No, too vague. Or curiosity? Nah, too all-purpose, too obvious. Mortality? Too grandiose, too woo-woo. Clarify? Getting warmer. Verbs do that. If I were allowed to go way over the limit and revise, which for me is the best part, I'd say something about how writing helps you find answers to vexing questions like this one. Gives you a momentary grip on the world before it slips free again and you start over. There's a word for this. Noun, maybe a verb. I just can't come up with it now. Sometimes it helps to change the subject, so here's a question for you. Are you sure it's less and not fewer? Never mind, I stick with less. Nobody ever says fewer is more. Less has more juice, more purchasing power, and wait, hold on. Purchase. It's the working title for my next book. Don't steal it.
Which is it? Purchase or the...
No.
I just don't know which one I could steal.
That means she gets them all.
There's a lot. Here's a title poem of an earlier book, As If Gravity Were a Theory, Bozeman Airport. Snow is falling everywhere, even up from the tarmac in the trembling around the engine barrels. Two men in earmuffs in a cherry picker aim pink foam from a fire hose. The wing melts down to its metal. An inch from my nose, the plexiglass ticks and stipples into archipelagos of water. One of the men waves a broom, as if gravity were a theory, and we slide back slow in the weather to turn. Runway lights like blue match heads. The sky kneels down. Bits of sleet fly off the engines like sparks, crazy in the wing lights. Then a jerky hurtling, faster till the airfield gives way to sheer air. Nothing outside has a name, the Bridger Range invisible. Ranches big as counties, gone. No cottonwoods to give the river away. No river, no earth, no edge, not one fact to tell how far there is to fall. Poem in December. Somewhere south of White River Junction, I can't see anything beyond the bus window except an off-white whiteout. Road, ground, air, sky, all one, gone. No borderlines, no distinctions. The driver pulls into a truck stop and gets out to whack the wheel wells with a ski pole, then wipes the wipers with a fistful of paper towels. No eye contact as he hops back on, shaking his head. All that did was put us further behind. No complaint here on the aisle in row 3. My seat tilts back, there's Wi-Fi and complimentary coffee and pretzels, and the overhead light lets me read in the dark. My little book tells an unforgettable story. We know from the beginning how it will turn out, but that's all the more heartbreaking. Bad weather plays a role there too, an innocent sliver of the cruelty at hand. On the last day of our journey, a terrible wind arose. It snowed without ceasing. We felt that the end was near, the real end. A rail wagon carried young Elizel and the others, still barely alive, from Auschwitz to Buchenwald. The wagon wide open to the cold, but less crowded, with the dead heaved off into the dark. The wagon where, for a terrible moment, in a terrible, never-ending night, Elizel begrudged his beloved father a chance at breadcrumbs tossed by the laughing SS workmen. Do not think I'm comparing my bus to that rail wagon in the story. It's just where I am right now, two places at once. When I came to the end, reading, buckled in, a bit overdressed in my ripstop reversible down vest, it made a difference that years ago in another country, a man found words for unbearable, unspeakable memories. And I can hear them on an express bus running late in the snow, words that carried all that way, crying and singing over the tracks. Two more. This is an elegy to my father. Wildflowers. Until I heard the names in my own voice, I never saw them whole. Chickweed, toothwort, mayapple, Dutchman's breeches, Indian pipe. A list was my father's way of witnessing. It made a flower real. And this afternoon in the weedy meadow by the towpath, I'm jotting odd names on a scrap of paper for no one in particular, myself maybe, or my father. Back then, I let him teach me to look down at the ground for stars, bells, shades of blue. He was never happier than when we looked up accuracy's myriad names and he wrote them out in slanted letters. Now, over and over like a child, I say, gill over the ground, gill over the ground, gill over the ground. And in the saying, see it blossom again inside its spilled blue name. Along Mink Brook, early spring. The locals have laid down bets on when the thick lake ice will break up. And here already the cracking and creaking make way for slow, dark water. A raft of ice drifts upstream, a smooth white sail, wind winning for a while against water on its long downfall to the sea. The day after the funeral, we walk out into the cold light of this earthly world, which goes on unmoved by our need to name it. I'm an amateur thumbing through my Audubon, trying to keep up, sidetracked by names. I rejoice in them all. The Phoebe Joanne just spotted, her first of the season. The kingfisher going berserk across the water. Juncos, flickers, chickadees, crows. Common mergansers, rare somewhere. And out by the ice floe, the ring-necked gull, which has no ring around its neck. Then the song sparrow, the one I couldn't see in the brushy white pine, flies out, lights on a willow shoot, and sways in silhouette against watery light, a dusky little nameless bird until it sings. Thank you.
Are we going to take questions?
I like that, please. I ask the question, you
I'll answer with one word or less.
Hey, we want to make sure we get this on the video.
I hear silence. We could go for.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you have a process for writing regularly, just
Irregularly.
when the muse hits you?
Maybe. I don't have a regular process like a lot of people do. I don't write 3 hours every morning or half an hour every morning or stay up late at a certain time or in a certain place. No, I don't. So it comes and goes, and I don't know, that's never worked for me, and I can hear Bill Stafford saying, well, of course it never worked for you because you never tried it. And he has a point, as usual. Yeah, it's not helpful.
So who do you read? Who do you read? Who would you say influenced you?
The right answer.
Yeah. Well, Stafford for sure. Not everybody, but lots of people. Influences, I'd like to claim some influences. This will sound a little highfalutin, I suppose, but John Keats. And if you would ask me until I was 40-something years old if that could ever be true, I would have said no. But I got into John Keats's poetry via his letters, which I recommend. I think you'll find them, if you haven't read them, so contemporary. They're just wonderful. Nothing against the poems, but the letters are terrific. Walter and Emily from the 19th century, come on, of course. Lately I've been reading, because I'm in a class, Lila and some others, A.R. Ammons, Archie, we're now allowed to call him because our teacher, John Bram, who's wonderful, studied with Ammons and knew him well. A.R. Ammons, a distinctive voice like no other, I think. Grew up dirt poor on a farm in North Carolina, worked in a glass factory, and somehow ended up being the poet in residence at Cornell. And I think this is pretty distinctive. Won the National Book Award for a book called Garbage. It's one poem, a long poem. Anyway, other people going. Stephen Dunn, among contemporaries, is a wonderful poet and a wonderful writer and teacher, in my view, and an influence, a model, I hope. Yes?
I had read that you were a journalist, and I wondered, I wondered in one or more words, why or how did you start writing poetry?
Well, it's a long story, and maybe I should, I'll tell it to you sometime away from this, but the short answer is that I never dreamed of being a poet until I was somehow in my 40s, and I was on a journalism fellowship, year-long fellowship at Stanford, and we were told when we got there that yes, we could audit any class we wanted, but we weren't allowed to study journalism for the year. This was to make us smarter journalists. And we were also told, since we weren't getting any credit or any diploma or paying any tuition, we should try at least one impossible course during the year. And that didn't lead directly to poetry, but it's where I ended up, and that was my impossible course. And then I took another one and another one, and it's, I'm wary of people who say things like this, but it changed my life. So thank you to Stanford and W.S. DiPiero. Simone DiPiero, who taught that class and scared the hell out of me on the first day. I tried to quit the next day. I went to his office hours. This is true. The next day after the first class, I went to his office to tell him, no offense, but I'm quitting. I'm a journalist. I'm a reporter. Somebody who has, is really interested in, I don't want to take up a space for someone. These people all know what they're doing. I don't. And he talked to me, bless him.
In his Martin Scorsese, South Philly voice.
He dialed it back about one notch, the intensity and the scary intensity, and said he kind of liked adults in his classes of brilliant sophomores, I think. And so he talked me into it. Anyway, I used to think journalism and poetry were poles apart, nothing whatsoever to do with each other. I now, believe me, I understand the difference. I do. And I understand the importance of not making things up if you're a reporter. Just for the record, let me say that. And as a poet, I don't make much up either. I make things from, I think. But I also think the two have things to say to each other about our place in this complicated world.
Just so you connect those two, you said you enjoyed revision.
I do, which is a good thing because I never get it right the first time, and some people do, I guess, but I'm suspicious of reporters who say, here's a 3-page poem that just kind of wrote itself the other night, or yeah, even on headline. I love revision. I like with revision, I always think, well, there's something to work with. I think the blank page is a little scary, sort of like one word or less, I guess.
Or heavy on the or less.
The less is really scary. But even if it's a mess on the first draft, there's, I don't know, something to push around, and then it gets the really enjoyable part later, I'd say, is, and sometimes just after many, many false starts, as you may know, when you really think you have something that's okay and you're going to make it good, or maybe even if you're really lucky, good, and you're going to make it even better. I don't know. I think a lot of writers would disagree with me on that. I think a lot of writers find the most exciting part about writing is that blank page, is that launching, that jump off point. I just like revision.
Is the process of revision syntactical? Is it you're looking at the sentence or the line, or is it driven by diction, the words that you use? So what is the driver in the revision? Is it what the line is saying? What's driving the revision?
Well, the easy answer for me would be to say everything, because I think at times it is everything. So I think the syntax is the toughest part for me, since you said syntactical. I think diction is a little easier. I mean, realizing that one word isn't quite what you want and looking for another word, I'm not saying it's like a thesaurus, but it's more limited. But to change the syntax of a poem is tough, and really can change the whole poem very quickly. I would say the same with rhythm, which I would add into your mix of everything. Not very helpful here. I mean, it's hard work. Sorry?
Just say 3 points where you would find joy in revision.
Say 3 points?
Yeah.
Wow. See, I'm stalling for time here, but Somerset Maugham said there are 3 rules for writing a novel. The trouble is nobody knows what they are. Does that count as 1 at least, or do I get 3 for that? Beginning, middle, and end. I'm not trying to be flip. It's hard. It's hard to do it, and it's hard, I think, to talk about it. And maybe why I'm not a teacher. Annie.
What do you remember as a young person of poetry? Do you remember horrible things, or do you remember good times, or which?
A mixture, I guess. I think when I look back to as a child or as a young student in school, high school, say, I look back with disappointment. I think one reason I never thought of being a poet until Simone Di Piero changed my mind was that in high school, I think many of us of a certain age had this experience. The only poems we read, the goal was to kind of decode them, and that was bad for a couple of reasons, because it implied that there was a code. And I kind of kept that assumption, I think, for a long time. That it was a puzzle that you unpuzzled. Billy Collins, a wonderful contemporary poet and very funny, but serious funny, which is better than funny, has written several poems about how the first thing his teachers did, I think, was strap the poem to a chair and beat it to death and try to beat the truth out of it. He says it better than that. Help me out. What's the title?
Beat it to submission, I think.
Yeah. And I remember that. I don't remember fun or playfulness or even just fooling around with the language, or it felt very formal and serious to me, and I regret that because it took me a long time to get over it.
So you never sat there and wrote music or wrote
No.
poetry to your girlfriend?
No. Did I say that rather suddenly? No. No.
I had so many students in the 80s who all thought they could write poetry. Oh my God.
Well, that may be another problem, but I don't know. Bill Stafford, again.
I like poetry.
Bill Stafford would say, well, they could, And he would say, well, Don, when did you stop, writing a poem? When you were a kid? When and why and how? I did write one poem in fourth grade, so I've already lied to you. I was a journalist. Are you recording this?
I can't say.
I knew this would happen. You are, I know. I did write, it was 2 lines, 8 words, and I've written, of course, an adult poem about it, so I'm reluctant to, well, now I have to say it. This was in the 50s in the Boston area after the Brinks robbery. I don't think it had a title, my poem. In his spare time, Trigger Burke commits crime. So, I thought it was, to rhyme crime, it's pretty good. I thought so anyway. That was about it. And then I took 35 years off. And before
One last question.
or less.
One right here.
I was just wondering what you feel inspires you, whether it's, it might be all of the above, but whether it's more, as a journalist, the things that you see or the writing that you read, or if there's any particular thing that you go to for inspiration.
It's all over the place. I know these days in writing classes, or even without the class, writing prompts are a big deal. They never have been for me. I'm not against them. I don't know. If they work for you, great, a writing prompt. Whatever works. For me, it makes it feel a bit like an exercise right from the start, and I have trouble getting outside of that. So I say, well, maybe the world is my prompt. And that's really cavalier sounding, I know. But I think it's true. So that it can come from anywhere, you know, large, big ideas or little tiny ideas and facts in the world. I mean, I love, one of the things I like about A.R. Ammons, this reading that we're doing now, is that his poems manage to be, I think, philosophical, which would be a scary word for me to it wouldn't be a recommendation for many. And they're philosophical while paying really close attention to the here and now of our lives. And big and little and all that. And why not both? It has to be both, I think. I mean, words, a motto for this reading series and so many other things that we all do these days. And I'm not even going to mention the televised hearing that I watched for 3 hours this morning when I should have been preparing my reading. Words matter. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Judith Montgomery is going to be here in December. Please enjoy the refreshments. Don's got books, so he will be here for